Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our first official Eating W's mock draft. So excited that it's finally truly in the full swing of mock draft season. Anything before free agency is barely actually a mock draft because who knows who's going where. But now that free agency is for the most part over, there's still a couple of bigger dominoes that need to fall. But all of the biggest dominoes have already fell and teams are a little more solidified. So now it's really time to lock in, start doing some mock drafts, and give our predictions for who's going where in the 2023 NFL draft. So the way we're going to do it is you are going to get 4 mock drafts in the next 4 weeks leading up to the draft. Cal and I are going to rotate each week doing a mock draft, and we are starting with me. So this episode will be my mock draft 1.0. But before we jump into my mock draft, just one quick bit of news, one more of those dominoes of free agency that fell. The Seahawks have reunited with Bobby Wagner on a 1-year, $7 million deal. So it's a pretty good deal for both sides. Bobby Wagner gets paid a good bit of money, but the Seahawks still save some money and get a pretty good linebacker. And reunited, and it feels so good.
Yeah, he played for the Seahawks, obviously, for a couple years ago, and he was their defensive leader as part of that Legion of Boom. And, Bobby Wagner kind of went ring chasing a little bit, signing with the Rams, and now he went back home to the Seahawks to, I think, end his career. So good for the Seattle Seahawks getting a really nice player.
Yep, definitely. Love to see it. So now we are going to jump into my mock draft and start none other than the first overall pick. But the first overall pick, I have the Carolina Panthers taking Ohio State quarterback C.J. Stroud. Now, it's really a toss-up here. You know they're going quarterback. There's no way they go anywhere else. But it's just a toss-up on who. The big 3 really are either Stroud, Bryce Young, or Anthony Richardson has had some talks, but I have Stroud mostly just because I know that Frank Wright is going to want that bigger body quarterback. He's always had that in Carson Wentz and Nick Foles when he was doing his best stuff there in Philly. So he's going to want to go there again. And out of the big 3, Stroud is the best all-around quarterback with the bigger build.
Yeah, I have Stroud as my top-ranked quarterback. He's got the perfect size for it. Bryce Young's a little bit smaller in size, so you don't like to see that as much. But with Stroud's size and his football IQ, he's going to help lead the Panthers to a much better season than they had last year.
Yep. And then moving on to my number 2 overall pick, I have the Houston Texans selecting Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. Now, of course, here's the other big quarterback domino to fall for the NFL draft. And I think that the Texans, it's going to be between Stroud and Young in my eyes. And the Texans are pretty much just going to pick whoever the Panthers don't. So it's weird because I feel like it's almost not even really the Texans' pick. They're just getting the leftover of the top 2 quarterbacks. But I actually think Bryce Young fits much better in Houston. Houston has a much better pass-protecting offensive line than the Panthers did. And I think Bryce Young, with that smaller, more shifty frame, is going to fit better with a little bit of better protection there in Houston.
Yeah, I agree that Houston definitely has a better offensive line with Laramie Tunsil leading the way there. And even though Bryce Young does have that smaller size, he definitely still has the potential to be a superstar quarterback for the Texans, who apparently are going to replace DM3.
You got to imagine they do. I hate to see it, but you got to imagine it happens eventually.
It'll be a nice backup for him, though.
Certainly, a really good backup. Moving on to the 3rd pick, I have the Arizona Cardinals selecting Alabama again, but this time an outside linebacker, Will Anderson Jr., very arguably one of the best defensive players in the draft, just an absolute beast in both the pass rush game and the run protection game. It's really hard to go wrong with a pick like this, pretty much no matter which defense you run. And since the Cardinals are the first team to take a defensive player, I have them taking the top one.
Yeah, and it's the safest pick in the draft, according to the experts. He's the top edge rusher in the draft and will help lead the Cardinals with a rejuvenated defensive line.
Yep, and then now moving on to the 4th overall pick, I have the 3rd quarterback getting picked with Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson going to the Indianapolis Colts. Now this time they have Shane Steichen. I almost messed that up earlier. But the Colts got Shane Steichen as their new head coach this year, who was the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles last year. So he kind of got used to having a more mobile, bigger, stronger quarterback. So I think he's going to want that for his new team. The Colts have a really good run-blocking offensive line as well as one of the better running backs in the league with Jonathan Taylor. So why not just stack onto that mobility and take the upside of Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, this guy definitely has the most potential and the most athletic ability. So it'll be interesting to see how well his game transpires over to the NFL.
Yep. Now moving on to the 5th overall pick, rounding out the top 5, I have the Seattle Seahawks taking Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter. Now, kind of just same with Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson Jr. was very arguably the top pick, and Jalen Carter is arguably the top pick, if not very arguably the next best defensive player on the board. The Seahawks need defensive line no matter where they want to look at it, whether on the edge or in the middle. So take the best defensive lineman, and a little bit of a risk with Jalen Carter, of course, considering the legal trouble he's been in recently. But I don't think that will affect him a ton as time goes on. So they get a pickup here.
Yeah, he was looked at as the 1st overall pick before the Bears traded it. And then his stock kind of fell after his recent legal troubles. But I still think that he's one of the safest players in the draft in terms of NFL talent.
Yeah, he's a beast. Moving on, I have the Detroit Lions' first round pick at 6 overall, and I have them taking Oregon cornerback Christian Gonzalez. The Detroit Lions have a lot of ways they can go here, and they're really a toss-up pick. But I have them taking Christian Gonzalez just because he's a Dan Campbell player, to say the least. Hard worker, loves football. He can play man and zone coverage. He's going to do whatever he needs to help his team win. And like I said, that's just a Dan Campbell type guy. So why not pick up another great player on that Detroit defense?
Yeah, that's a good pickup for the Detroit Lions, who get a big, tall corner at 6'2", 200 pounds to help revamp that defensive backfield.
Yep, certainly. Moving on to the 7th overall pick with the Las Vegas Raiders. And you want to talk about a toss-up. I said the Lions were a toss-up. The Raiders are really a toss-up. They just need so much on their team, whether on each side of the ball. But I personally have them picking up the best tackle in this draft, in my opinion, in Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern. He's just such a fundamentally solid prospect, and that's great because you see that transfer really good to the NFL a lot of the time compared to your more just aggressive, big tackles. When you get a true fundamental tackle, they usually do really well. So I think it's a really good pickup to protect whoever they want to end up throwing in there at quarterback, whether it's Jimmy G or somebody else in Las Vegas.
It'll probably be Jimmy G since they signed him to that big contract. But I definitely agree with him being the top overall tackle in this draft. And the Raiders get a stonewall at either left or right tackle. I believe he can play either one. And he's just, right? He can play the left or right.
He played left his entire time at Northwestern, but he probably could play either.
Yeah,
I think
that was what I was reading.
I think it's more likely that the Raiders actually kick Colton Miller over to right tackle because he's a little more versatile there and have a good pass protector for Jimmy G's blind side in Peter Skoronski. But who knows what the Raiders will do?
They'll just draft the fastest player available still.
That's a very good possibility. Those 40 times were looking good. DJ Turner, Michigan, I think he had the fastest this year.
Look for it.
That might be our 7th overall. Next up, I have the Atlanta Falcons taking the first receiver off the board in this year's draft in my favorite receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State. Smith-Njigba is just one of the best all-around receivers. He's a guy who can get in there and do it all, and I think he's going to complement the big-bodied Drake London, who they picked up last year, very, very well.
Yeah, this will definitely be a top-tier pick for the Atlanta Falcons, who will duo with Drake London and create quite the wide receiver duo.
Yeah, and when you got a guy like, assumably Desmond Ridder in there, as it looks like who they're going to go with, you're going to need to give him as many weapons as possible. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears making their first round pick at 9th overall, and I have them taking Texas Tech edge rusher Tyree Wilson. This guy really shot up the draft boards around combine time. So the Bears usually like to kind of go with the more obvious picks, unless they take quarterback. Sometimes they like to randomly take quarterback or just any position they don't need. But I think that they get a really good edge rusher here in Tyree Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Something they've struggled with in the past few years is creating pressure on the quarterback. So why not get an elite edge rusher in the draft?
Yeah, he's the second best edge rusher in the draft behind Will Anderson, and another very safe pick for the defensive-minded Chicago Bears.
Yep. Now at 10th overall, rounding out the top 10 picks with the Philadelphia Eagles' first round pick, I have them taking a little bit of a reach, but something that's really going to help them out. I have them taking Florida guard O'Cyrus Torrence. Taking a guard this early is a little bit of a reach in general, especially considering the Eagles have a few other spaces that they might need a little more than offensive line. But outside of the 4 really good offensive linemen they have at right guard, they have a little bit of a gap right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think O'Cyrus Torrence is just such a perfect way to fill that gap. They could probably trade around and maybe get some extra value and still get Torrence, but why not just make sure you get him at that 10th overall pick?
Yeah, if you like the player, go and get him. And, they lost Isaac Siomolo. I might have been butchering that name, but he was their starting left guard also this year. So they need some help on that interior offensive line. So why not get the best interior offensive lineman in the draft?
Yep. Now moving on to the 11th overall pick with the Tennessee Titan, I have them going with our first Iowa boy of the first round. A little bit of a spoiler there. Lucas Van Ness. They have him in as an edge rusher, but he's more of a true defensive end. The Titans are kind of like the Raiders, where they have a lot of different ways where they could go, lots of different gaps they need to fill in. But they have a huge gap at defensive line outside of Jeffrey Simmons. But to even add on top of that, they're kind of having some contract trouble with Jeffrey Simmons right now, getting an extension. I know he wanted an extension, and they're having struggles getting him that said extension. So who knows? They might even, at a complete worst case scenario, lose Jeffrey Simmons as well. So why not get a really good prospect in Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa?
Yeah, he's a more 4-3 style system guy, but he's going to be really good in that style of system. And then he can play either inside or on the outside of that 4-3, and he'll be a standout defensive player for the Tennessee Titans.
Yep. And then now moving on to the 12th overall pick, I have a string of 2 offensive tackles going in a row right here. But starting with the Houston Texans, I have them picking up Ohio State tackle Paris Johnson Jr. Of course, they already have a really good bookend tackle in Laramie Tunsil Jr. on that left side. So why not really shore up that offensive line and get your other bookend at right tackle with Paris Johnson Jr. Johnson Jr. did play a lot of left tackle in his time at Iowa State, but he's just one of those bigger, mauler, aggressive offensive tackles. So they usually transition over to right tackle pretty well. And you're putting a lot of money into that second overall pick in a new quarterback. So you better make sure you can protect him.
Yeah, got to protect the quarterback. So the Texans are doing that by getting that bookend on, just go with the right tackle.
Yep. And then now moving on to that second of the 2 tackles I mentioned with the New York Jets picking at 13th overall, I have them going to Georgia and picking up tackle Broderick Jones. Now it's really funny because it's almost the exact situation. So sorry, but I'm going to say pretty much the exact same thing. They already have that left tackle bookend in Mekhi Becton. So why not finish out that bookend and get someone on that right tackle side? They're even very similar prospects. Same reason with Johnson Jr. as Broderick Jones. He's just one of those bigger, aggressive tackles, so he should move over to right tackle pretty well. And this is assuming they get Aaron Rodgers in a trade, though it hasn't happened yet. I'm assuming it's going to happen, so you better protect your new quarterback.
Yeah, I definitely agree that they need to protect the quarterback, whether it's Zach Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. I don't believe that they would have this pick, that this probably will go to Green Bay more than likely. But if they do make this pick, this is definitely a strong pick for them to bookend both of your ends with strong Georgia offensive linemen.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Mekhi Becton was Georgia. I forgot about that. So now moving on to the 14th overall pick with the New England Patriots, I have my first little bit of a slip in this draft, but I have them taking Illinois corner Davon Witherspoon. Witherspoon is probably the top corner, and a lot of people have him going more in that 6 to 10 range. but I personally have him falling just a little bit. And New England here has a couple of things that they could go with outside of corner. But when a guy like Witherspoon is still on the board when you pick, you just kind of go best player available. It'll still really help them to get a corner because they got a bunch of other young guys right now who could rotate in with and learn from. So I think this is a really good pick for New England and a steal.
Yeah, and he'll fit into the New England system very well in that Belichick defensive system. As a top corner in this draft, he'll take over the spot that was left by Jonathan Jones.
Yep, I believe they have Jonathan Jones and Jack Jones, so I can never remember what's
one
which.
of them left.
Yeah, I think Jack Jones might have left. I think they re-signed Jonathan Jones.
Okay, but I knew one of them left, so they had a hole in that corner spot.
There's just too many Joneses. Who knows who it is?
And Mac Jones.
They lost someone. Mac Jones even, yeah. And then now for my favorite pick in this year's draft. At 15th overall, I have the Green Bay Packers taking Kentucky quarterback Will Levis. I talked about it a few weeks ago that Will Levis is kind of my draft crush this year. He's one of my favorite players. He's definitely has a few question marks surrounding him, but I think he has a ton of potential and a ton of upside as a true pocket passer quarterback who's not afraid to leave the pocket and use his legs a little bit. So again, like I said with the Jets, this is assuming the Packers do trade Aaron Rodgers. Who knows what Jordan Love's going to do? There's a lot of question marks around Jordan Love. So why not sure up or kind of double down on some question marks and know that one of them might pay off and get Will Levis with 15th overall?
I think it just would create more controversy. Poor Jordan Love can't get away from the quarterback controversy if they really do draft Will Levis. But I disagree with the pick. I think Will Levis will be a nice player. I think he'll be a fantastic quarterback. But I'm all for Jordan Love and giving him a shot and seeing how he does.
The shots I've seen from him are they're kind of bricks.
I will state I would much rather just keep Aaron Rodgers. That's my opinion, true, honest opinion. I would rather just keep Rodgers, but I understand the NFL is a business and players get traded, players get let go, and I stick with my team.
Could we see the first quarterback carousel in Green Bay since 1990 when Favre got there?
The old Don Mikowski.
Who knows? But moving on to the 16th overall pick with the Washington Commanders, I have the first tight end coming off the board in a very tight end heavy draft this year with Notre Dame tight end Michael Mayer. Logan Thomas is the Commanders' starting tight end right now, but outside of that, I think they actually have a pretty solid roster, and they definitely don't need wide receivers. So why not get your pick as some of the better tight ends in the draft for, first of all, running 2 tight end sets, which I know they did quite a bit last year, and also Logan Thomas is getting a little older, so why not get a good receiving threat to replace him a few years down the road? And like I said, get your pick, and I think that their pick will be Michael Mayer.
That's a good pickup for the Commanders there. Who Logan Thomas has had injury concerns by missing a number of games the last few seasons. So this is a good security blanket to back up Logan Thomas and grow and to develop him and Michael Mayer into the next starting tight end.
Yep. And then next up, I have my favorite player in this year's draft coming off the board to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the 17th overall pick. I have them taking Penn State corner Joey Porter Jr. Over this offseason, they recently lost Cam Sutton, which is one of their starting corners. So why not go and get a hard-nosed guy? He's willing to get in there and help in the run game and lay the boom when he needs to. That doesn't mean he's not really good in man coverage and pretty solid in zone coverage too. He really fits as a Pittsburgh corner in my opinion because a lot of those guys that play corner there for the Steelers don't really create a ton of turnovers, but they're all very helpful in the run game, very sticky in man coverage, and I think that Joey Porter Jr. fits that well. And it's where Joey Porter played, so even more perfect.
Makes sense, like father, like son.
Exactly.
And this is another big and tall corner for the Steelers, where there's a lot of tall corners in this draft. This is another one that goes to the Steelers and will help lead that defensive resurgence in the Steelers defensive backfield.
Yep. Next up, we got the Lions taking their second of 2 first-round picks and getting a guy that I really like in this year's draft. Kalahe Kancey, the defensive lineman out of Pittsburgh. I really like this guy because he has one of my favorite traits in the NFL, which is being able to pressure the quarterback as an inside defensive lineman.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I think is super overrated, and a lot of guys in the NFL have built careers off of. And I think this is another guy that will play super well in that role, especially in a Dan Campbell defense. And man, the Lions get scarier and scarier every year.
Mm-hmm. This is another Dan Campbell pick, a hard-working defensive lineman that can rush the passer from the inside. You can't ask for anything much better than that from your interior defensive line.
Exactly. Now moving on to the 19th overall pick with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've seen some people give them a quarterback, but since I don't have any quarterbacks really left on the board, I have them taking the best running back prospect, some people say in a very long time, in Texas running back Bijan Robinson. Now, this is assuming they don't sign Ezekiel Elliott, which is a possibility. I think it's possible they sign Zeke. But I'm going to assume for now, since nothing has happened with him yet, that they don't sign him and they get a really good running back prospect here after losing Leonard Fournette and a guy who can really take over that offense along with Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, he'll team up well with Baker Mayfield in that Tampa Bay offensive backfield. But as the top running back, definitely he will. It'll be interesting to see how well he transfers into the NFL, because it's hard to come in the running back. It's hard to play running back in the NFL. They don't last very long. And Leonard Fournette, who just got released, is on the tail end of his career, and he was one of the top running backs taken just a few years ago.
Yep, top running back in 2017. So that was a good bit ago, but time still flies. When your life expectancy as a running back is only 6-7 years, that's pretty crazy. But they don't have an overly good offensive line, so I do kind of worry how they'll do with a rookie running back, but that's who I have here. Moving on to the 20th overall pick in the second of Seattle's 2 first-round picks, I have them reaching just a little bit and taking Minnesota center John Michael Schmitz. I think that this guy is the best center in this draft right now. He's a big guy, especially for a center. He's a little big for a center, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think he's one of the best centers run blocking specifically, and we all know that the Seahawks love to run the ball. So I think he just fits right in there in Seattle really well. They have Joey Hunt right now, who is by no means a bad center. Why not get an upgrade in a Minnesota center?
Especially a run blocking center for that run heavy team. He'll help lead the offensive line and do really good with the running game.
Yep. Next up, I have the Chargers at 21st overall, taking USC wide receiver Jordan Addison. Only the second receiver to come off the board, but again, I think he's going to complement that Los Angeles. What did I say?
Yeah, Los
Angeles. Sorry, I'm throwing myself off now. Who knows? I almost said San Diego. That's what threw me off. I think he's going to complement that Los Angeles receiving room really well. Right now, they have Keenan Allen, who's kind of a bigger route runner, and then Mike Williams, who's just that big, physical, 50-50 ball type guy. So here they get a smaller guy who's just going to be an absolute burner and be able to take the top off the defense.
Yeah, and I have Jordan Addison as my top wide receiver in this draft. And then so he falls quite a bit here in yours, down to the 21st spot. And even though he's only the second receiver taken, I think that he falls to a good spot in the LA Chargers, who may have to cut Keenan Allen, who's a prime cut candidate after June 1st. So they need someone to possibly replace him, and if not, complement him very well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the receivers are just kind of a dime a dozen in my eyes because there's just been so many good ones in these past few drafts, so it's hard to decide where they're going to fall. Next up at the 22nd overall pick, I have the Baltimore Ravens taking Maryland corner Devontae Banks. If you look at some of the other corners on the board, this may be a tad bit of the reach in your eyes, just depending on how you rate Devontae Banks. But comparing them to other big Baltimore corners, such as a guy who's leaving, but Marcus Peters, and especially Marlon Humphrey, who's of course still there, just got extended not too long ago, they like their bigger corners. And if you compare Devontae Banks to a lot of the other corners at 6'2", 205, he's not only one of the taller ones, but definitely one of the heaviest and biggest and strongest ones. So I think it fits the Baltimore way very well.
Yeah, that's another big and tall corner, common theme. Another big and tall corner to go to the Ravens, who will help him replace Marcus Peters.
Moving on to my team, the Minnesota Vikings, in the 23rd overall pick. I think the Vikings should probably take corner, but in my mock draft, the way the board fell, I have them taking Clemson defensive lineman Brian Bisi. The three front that Brian Flores is going to run, the 3-4 defense, has a lot of rotation at that defensive line. And outside of one or two staples, there is a ton of question mark and not much depth at all at that Minnesota defensive line right now. So why not get a bigger guy like Brian Bisi who can kind of move up and down that free front and play him wherever you want, get a lot of rotation there, and pick up one of the better defensive linemen in this draft.
Yeah, he seems like a prototypical 3-4 defensive end, and he'll fit in that new Vikings defense really well.
Yep. Moving on to the 24th overall pick with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I have them going back to the Georgia well and taking corner Kelee Ringo. Now, Kelee Ringo is a big question mark in the draft in my eyes right now because he is far and away probably the most athletic corner, and he's got some size and length on him at 6'2", 210. But there's just so many questions surrounding him. He hasn't been playing corner very long. If I'm not mistaken, he's a true sophomore. If not, I think he's a redshirt sophomore coming out of Georgia.
Redshirt sophomore.
So not a ton of experience in general, especially at that corner position. But the Jaguars are in a place right now where they're going young. They have a pretty good team and defense around him. So they can kind of take a swing at a really athletic guy and see if it turns into a home run instead of a foul.
Yeah, this would definitely be quite the pickup if it turned out to be that he plays well in the NFL. At 6'2", 210, he's the biggest corner in this draft, and that would be quite the pickup for the Jaguars. Even though, like you said, he's a very raw prospect, but he could turn out to be the most potential.
I could see him being very similar to a guy like Tyreek Woolen, who the Seahawks took a chance on last year, and it very much paid off for them. So, and then now at 25 with the New York Giants, I have them getting probably the steal in the draft fit-wise. I have them taking TCU wide receiver Quentin Johnson, who fell very far down the board in my opinion, but it's just kind of the way it fell out for me. But a good Kenny Golladay replacement, a guy they lost this year, and just another weapon on that already young, stellar New York Giants offense to complement Daniel Jones and his uprise in Brian Daboll at head coach.
Yeah, this is another big receiver for the Giants who, like you said, replaced Kenny Golladay. Hopefully there's a little more production from Quentin Johnson than Kenny Golladay, but he does have that same size and frame as Golladay. So they definitely had plans for him. So hopefully this will transpire better than the Kenny Golladay experiment.
All he would have to do is score 2 touchdowns in his time at New York, and he would technically outproduce Kenny Golladay. So not too much of a high bar there.
I bet he gets 2 in the first game.
Yeah, it's like playing limbo with like a 5-foot bar. You know, it makes it pretty easy. But next up at the 26th overall pick, we're keeping it in the NFC East and going with the Dallas Cowboys. And I have them taking a little bit of the reach, but a very, very interesting prospect in Georgia tight end Darnell Washington. Now, there's a couple of different places that the Cowboys could go, but after losing Dalton Schultz this offseason, I think tight end, especially in this good tight end draft class, is a place they'll go. And I think just getting a huge, big body tight end, he's 6'7", I want to say somewhere in the low 200s, so he is just, or mid 200s, I mean. So he is just an absolutely huge man, and I think he'll complement a lot of their smaller, shiftier receivers like CeeDee Lamb there in Dallas.
Yeah, and he's also the best run-blocking tight end in this draft. And that's good for the Cowboys, who like to run the ball also, even though they don't know how with Mike McCarthy. But they don't know how to use the running back with Mike McCarthy. But that's still a nice run-blocking pickup to add to your offensive line.
Darnell Washington is probably my favorite question mark in this year's draft. I'm very interested to see what he does. Moving on to the 27th overall pick with the Buffalo Bills, I have far and away the most bias of my mock draft 1.0, but I have them going Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell. Now here, more than anything, I just see the Bills going middle linebacker. They lost Tremaine Edmonds over this offseason, and they run a very efficient 3-4 with 2 true off-the-ball linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
They already re-signed Matt Milano, who's a great pass coverage guy, so they need more of just a true field general, run stopper type guy who can also cover some pass. And I don't think that there's a better guy in this draft at that than Jack Campbell. I, of course, as a big Iowa fan, have got to watch him for a couple of years now, and he is just everywhere on the field, getting people set up exactly where they need to be, and I think he'd be an awesome fit there in Buffalo.
Yeah, the Bednarik Award winner led the nation in tackles, so he'll be a tackling machine for the Buffalo Bills if it falls that way.
Yep. And then now here at 28 with the Cincinnati Bengals, I have them taking another tight end with Dalton Kincaid, the tight end out of Utah. Kincaid is very arguably the best tight end in this year's draft, and I've seen a lot of different mock drafts from NFL analysts and experts with him being the first tight end off the board. But I personally have him falling here to 28 to the Cincinnati Bengals, and he really reminds me of Hayden Hurst, whom the Bengals lost this offseason. So I think that he will perfectly refill that role.
Yeah, he'll replace Hayden Hurst, and I think the reason he fell is he had a back injury in college at the end of his career that sat him out some games. So I know that's the reason that he fell. And I think that, like you said, he'll be a perfect replacement for Hayden Hurst in that Bengals offense.
Some of those injuries are good notes to have.
Mm-hmm.
Now moving on to the 29th overall pick with the New Orleans Saints, I have them picking up Clemson edge rusher Myles Murphy. Now, just like Lucas Van Ness, they have him in as an edge rusher here, but I think Myles Murphy is much more of a true defensive end. The Saints have an aging Cameron Jordan, and they lost Marcus Davenport this offseason, so they really need help in a true defensive end. And I think Myles Murphy is far and away one of the better true defensive ends, 4-3 defensive ends rather, in this draft. So luckily for New Orleans, he falls all the way to them at 29.
Yeah, it's a perfect system pick for the New Orleans Saints, who get, like you said, get that perfect replacement for Marcus Davenport and that 4-3 defense.
Yep. And then now at the 30th overall pick with the Philadelphia Eagles taking their second of 2 first-round picks, I have them going with Tennessee wide receiver Jalen Hyatt. Now, they don't overly need wide receiver. They already have 2 absolute animals in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Totally blanked out on his name there. But I think Jalen Hyatt would be a really good thing to add to that. Similar to what I talked about with the Chargers earlier, he's just such a great complement to that already stellar receiver room. You have A.J. Brown as that kind of deep threat, bigger 50-50 ball guy. Devontae Smith is one of the better route runners in the league. And then now you get Jalen Hyatt, who's an all-around guy, but also more than anything can take the top off of a defense and is a burner.
Yeah, they get that speedster to go in the wide receiver spot in the slot there. And that will be dangerous in that Philadelphia Eagles offense, who would create quite the wide receiver trio if the Jalen Hyatt comes to Philly.
Yep. And then with the 31st overall pick and the final pick of the 2023 first round, because the Dolphins do not get their first round pick since they tampered with Tom Brady.
Don't talk to Brady.
Didn't work out for them, but they don't get a first round pick regardless. So
don't talk to Brady.
Only 31 picks in the 2023 first round this year. And with the final one, I have the Kansas City Chiefs taking Alabama safety Brian Branch. Now, this isn't necessarily a need for the Kansas City Chiefs by any means, a safety or defensive back in general. But Brian Branch has fell way down the board in my mock draft, the way it fell out. And he is just an absolute animal. He can play true safety. You can throw him in at slot corner. He can go and play more of a linebacker role and get involved in the run game. He is just a do-it-all guy, easily the best true safety in this draft. So the Chiefs just kind of take best player available and get Brian Branch.
Yeah, they get the top safety and the top player available at 31 there. And actually, they do need a replacement at safety because they lost Juan Thornhill in the offseason. So they do have an opening at safety. So this is a perfect fit for them to go with that Kansas City Chiefs defense.
Yeah, I think they would be ecstatic if Brian Branch actually did fall to them on draft night. So that is Caden's My Mock Draft 1.0. Man, it was so fun filling this out. I'm so excited. Next week, we will hear from Callan and get his mock draft 1.0. And then the week after that, it'll jump back to me and my mock draft 2.0. You probably noticed I didn't have any trades in this one. For our first mock drafts, we're doing no trades. And then our second one, if we want to do some trades, we can do them. But it's just a lot easier to do no trades. It makes it much simpler.
At least for the first one.
Exactly.
Kind of gets a little closer.
Kind of get a warm-up mock draft in us.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to tune in next week for Callan's first mock draft. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.